Thanks, Todd, for the intro. I just striped you $5. I mean, it's actually, I joke that I striped you $5, but how many of you have heard of Stripe? Okay, all the hands. How many of you actually know what Stripe does? Yeah, is that a problem for you, or is that okay because these aren't necessarily your customers?
That's right. Stripe is probably one of the companies that has a high ratio of usage to kind of brand awareness, and we're quite okay with that, in that a majority of Americans actually use Stripe each year, but our target customer is obviously internet businesses. We are building economic infrastructure for these internet businesses, and so long as the people starting startups, so long as the people building internet services know about us, we're kind of doing our job.
And so for the benefit of the many people that don't actually understand what it is, explain what services you guys provide, what you started out with and what you provide today. Let's start with just financial services, and we'll go beyond that.
So Stripe really started from the idea that all commerce is moving online, and yet the people who were providing payment services, financial services, the economic infrastructure, hadn't fully internalized that. And so if you kind of fast forward to a future, this was when we started Stripe in 2009, if you try to think about what that actually means and what the right service should look like, a few things fall out of that. One is people are increasingly going to be starting global businesses from day one. And so it's not about, if you start a coffee shop here, your target market is the 2-block, or maybe 1 mile radius. Whereas if you start an internet business, you can sell to people all over the world. Yet no one is really thinking about it that way. The financial industry was very domestically focused. That's one. The second is that you obviously want to focus on developers and build a product as an infrastructure platform, in that the medium in which you're actually working is the code and the set of APIs. And then the third is perhaps, as all this commerce moves online, and just to ground you, less than 5% of consumer spending happens online today. I think we're pretty clearly an order of magnitude off where that will be in a steady state. And as that commerce moves online, it's going to look pretty different, and the companies that people start, the business models they have, are going to look pretty different than the companies they're replacing. And so a lot of software as a service companies, a lot of marketplace style companies, a lot of on-demand. We were just talking about, before we went on stage, the new wave of bike sharing companies. There's a handful of them building on Stripe, like Mobike and Limebike here in Seattle. And so new kinds of companies and new kinds of business models coming along. And so Stripe is the platform for people building these internet businesses. Narrowly, we started out helping people accept payments and credit card payments, but of course, that was 6 years ago. We've now grown significantly beyond that into providing the tools for people to actually run their business.
And so what kinds of things today do people rely on Stripe, and where is that going?
So two maybe, or to give you three really common examples. One is people just want to accept money from people around the world. That sounds like it shouldn't even be a problem, right? It sounds really conceptually simple. And yet, we, earlier this summer, we launched partnerships with Alipay and WeChat Pay. So that allows businesses here, in the US or in the markets we serve, to tap into a $150 billion Chinese consumer demand and sell to the hundreds of millions of Chinese consumers with accounts. There was no real good way for businesses to do that before now.
So for example, GeekWire, I think they have subscriptions. It's pretty easy if they just want US readers to subscribe and send them a bunch of money. But without somebody like you, it's actually really hard if there's a reader in even Ireland, but certainly in China, that wants to send them money.
Exactly. And that kind of gets to when you were when you're starting out, this idea of what does Stripe actually do. I think this is the kind of thing that conceptually is fairly simple to people, and conceptually, the complexity is abstracted away from people. But actually, if you talk to anyone who's ever had to do this, you're getting into having in-house teams of payments experts for any company operating at any kind of scale internally, which is not the way at all it should be. And so, one of the ways we think about it is sort of similar to the cloud shift that happened, where you have people going from managing servers, having DevOps teams in-house, to realizing this is not really something that's leveraged for us that we should be spending time on. Similarly, just the economic infrastructure, our idea is to make that available as a platform to companies, and then they can focus on what's actually a good use of their time, which is competing on product.
So I've heard it described as the AWS of payments. Is that a good way for people to think of it?
That's actually a pretty close analogy, because one of the things that I quite admire about how AWS has grown as a business is obviously they started out with EC2, S3, SQS, the very basic primitives for compute storage and things like this. And then they pretty quickly realized that there were more powerful abstractions to offer developers, to offer technical teams. And it's been somewhat similar with Stripe, where a credit card processor is actually not that useful a service. Everyone's actually trying to solve some underlying business need. And so a really common thing that people do with Stripe is they build some kind of multi-sided marketplace. And so think of the Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, all these kinds of interactions where you're actually accepting payments on behalf of someone else. That, we started realizing, was an order of magnitude more complex than just the normal kind of payment acceptance use case. And so we built Stripe Connect for that based on customer feedback. And so there's been a somewhat similar pattern with AWS where we started with one fairly basic core primitive and have since really grown the offering. Our most recent of that was earlier this summer, Stripe Sigma, which is our analytics product, given that you're giving so much, you're putting so much data in Stripe, actually letting you gain useful insights from it.
And what kind of things can you tell people about their business based on the data that you have?
Looking at, one of the most common ones is looking at geographic mix, looking at kind of customer LTV, looking at any kind of trends across the business, and trying to realize where you might be underweight, where you might be kind of missing opportunities.
So that's a little bit on kind of what you guys are doing. I think what's most interesting is what that enables, how these shift in businesses. So I want to spend most of our time talking about how business is changing. There was a poll question of how do you pay, and I got the sense that your belief, or you probably wouldn't be in this business, is today very little is happening digitally compared to what should be when we reach sort of an endpoint. There's things though that hint at that future, and you were talking, this bike sharing idea. Bikes are not new technology. There was nothing stopping you from throwing a bunch of bikes in the middle of the city and letting people use them, except we didn't have a good way to pay for it before. And where does sort of digital payments, and where are you guys seeing sort of this innovation around businesses that just wouldn't exist but for a really smooth, easy, simple digital payments option?
Yeah, you're seeing a confluence of a few things, right? One is whenever there's a large platform shift, it enables a whole bunch of new startups and companies to be formed in the wake of the new environment that's being created. And so, we originally saw this with desktop computers and then the internet, and the most recent one, which still hasn't fully played out, is just the fact that there are 3 billion people walking around the world with smartphones. And so that gives you kind of one ingredient. The second for us that's very important is this idea of global economic connectivity. So the idea that you can build a global business from day one. I mean, even the term multinational kind of evokes this, giant, very sophisticated skyscraper. We see two-person businesses getting started that are selling all around the world that are kind of multinationals from day one. And then the third thing that we're seeing is a really rapid improvement in the customer experience of actually buying online. And so it used to be the case, right, that buying online was less convenient than buying offline. Buying offline was pretty quick, and buying online, you're there kind of filling out this mail order form. And even up to maybe 5 years ago, that was true. Since then, we've seen, one, the emergence of a set of services, a lot of them building on Stripe, that take the consumer experience of actually paying for something really seriously. And so when you get out of a lift, payment is done. I don't know about you guys. I've gotten out of a taxi a few times recently, and you just kind of forget to pay because you've gotten so used to that as no, come back. As a customer
That's actually
experience.
the secret to how he's a self-made billionaire. Stripe things.
Look after the pennies, yeah. And so there's that. And obviously Apple Pay and Android Pay reducing by an order of magnitude the time investment required. All of these things starting to compound such that you can build a rackless bike sharing service like LimeBike in a way that you probably couldn't really 10 years ago.
And one way that I sort of think about this, and we were talking about backstage, is that a lot of this was sort of hinted at. The promise of .com 1.0 was that the internet was going to change every business. And then we had this big bubble burst when it realized it wasn't, the takeaway that a lot of people had was, oh, the internet isn't going to change every business. And it seems like the right takeaway was, it isn't going to change every business as quickly as we thought it was. And the combination of a little more time and some of the changes that came with mobile, we were backstage, and it's hard to think of a .com 1.0 proposition that isn't actually a service today, seemingly permanently.
Yeah, people tend to overestimate the change in the short run and underestimate the change in the long run. And in particular, with respect to the .com bubble, just because technologies are hyped or are hyped beyond their kind of present potential doesn't mean that there isn't actually a kernel of really interesting truth and potential there. So as you say, all of the things that were predicted in the .com bubble, like quick grocery delivery via webvan, we're now seeing come to pass with services like Instacart. And so I think you're absolutely right that a lot of that .com bubble promise is being played out, just on a different time horizon. And again, the way we view this is, I think, quite different to probably a lot of the companies that you might see up here, in that we do not want to own all of the value chain. We are not actually looking to solve all of these problems directly. We are very happy operating at a meta level. We want to build the infrastructure platform, particularly for the economic infrastructure, for the business infrastructure, and then, as you saw at the beginning, we're quite happy not being a consumer brand. People build these consumer brands on Stripe. That's how we try to have that effect in the world.
And I'm also curious how much of that learning and knowledge we can take from .com 1.0 and apply it to some of the things that are really being hyped today. And one of those, obviously, cryptocurrency, ICO, all this stuff. I want to start first, because I suspect I might not be the only novice in the room on cryptocurrency stuff. How do you explain it to somebody who doesn't really understand? Like, what is cryptocurrency? What is really going on right now? And what are the sort of real practical implications, the sort of pieces that are overhyped?
The real...
That's my problem, too.
Yeah. So, the big advance with cryptocurrencies was having a distributed consensus protocol and a store of value merged together. I'm not sure if that is actually any clearer an explanation, but it really was a compelling a compelling advance. And when people talk about doing things on the blockchain, really what they mean is that they're pulling out the distributed consensus protocol part of that and leaving aside the currency component. And it's sort of hard to talk about crypto these days because we have two things going on together. We have a bunch of interesting technology developments happening on the actual protocol side, and then we have this sort of stock market, this bull market going on in the ICO space, where there's a handful of ICOs and tokens that are rapidly increasing in value. And so there's kind of the technological advances, and then there's this weird stock market, and they get conflated in the same word, crypto. And I think they actually bear separating out.
And I think you're pretty bullish on the tech piece and a little more skeptical on
the tech
finance.
piece is a genuinely interesting, advance in computer science, and there's lots of interesting work going on there. And then there's a lot of shysters running ICOs.
And talk about that. Is there a dramatic breakthrough that the ICO allows other than avoiding regulation?
There is definitely a real advance, but it's kind of hard to talk about the ICOs as a class. You kind of have to look at them on a one-by-one basis.
So the idea, in .com 1.0, maybe the fact that somebody had internet in their name wasn't necessarily a predictor of success. Similarly,
exactly.
The fact that somebody's fundraising through this new method doesn't inherently make them a better or worse company.
Yep.
Shocking. So sort of the ICO piece aside, I'm curious if there's an analogy, and we talked about this a little bit backstage. I remember with Napster, there was a question of, there was the music delivery piece, and then there was peer-to-peer is going to change everything. Do you see parallels with blockchain of being a new technology for delivering things and sort of Bitcoin is sort of one application of it? And if so, which are you more excited about, the music or the peer-to-peer part?
I mean, in general, the thing I get excited about, and the reason I'm kind of backing away from blockchain in specific, is because I think it's actually a whole host of things in this space, is that there was this, imagine you were raising money for Stripe in 2010, which I was, and you're trying to convince people that it's a way to accept money on the internet. People just thought that that was done, right? We had solved all the hard problems of e-commerce, of exchanging value online, things like that. And it turned out that was not the case at all. And we're seeing all these advances when it comes to how we deal with identity on mobile. We're seeing all these advances when it comes to new sorts of blockchain technologies and things that people can do with them. When it comes to, I mean, on our side, the kinds of economic infrastructure that Stripe is building, I think people are finally starting to grok. They're actually pretty early, even now, in the set of things that you can build, now that you have 3 billion people walking around with smartphones in their pockets, and the kinds of companies that you can start even in 2017. And for me, all the crypto advances are one side of that, but they're not the meat of it. I think you tend to get these oversimplified hype cycles, and right now we're in the crypto AI hype cycle, and that's not what gets us out of bed in the morning.
So in your next fundraising pitch, you're not billing yourself
Stripe
as an
is a
AI
crypto company,
yeah. So you guys are in a kind of a unique position because of being in the middle and touching, as you mentioned, initially it was a lot of startups, but now a lot of startups and big business. It strikes me that we're at this unique moment where in almost every industry you have the giants of today and some tech-based startup that thinks they can do it better, and it's a race. In automotives, it's can the startups learn how to build a car faster than the car makers can learn software. In banking and finance, you have banks with customer relationships and knowledge versus startups with new ideas and less legacy. With some of the industries you touch, where are you seeing that balance? Are there some good examples where the existing players are actually learning the tech side faster and fast enough that you think they'll survive?
Yeah, so I mean, we see this across the entire range of Stripe customers, because it's everything from new two-person startups in a living room to the the Salesforces and the Facebooks and the Yelps and and kind of the more established properties, things like that. And I think what it's kind of, as you say, across every industry there is. It's actually not always easy to tell up front whether Tesla can ramp up car production faster than existing car manufacturers can get good at batteries. Or I think there was a lot of predictions in the early days of the internet that in banking that we'd see new challenger banks emerge who would get good at becoming a regulated bank faster than the existing banks could get good at the technology side. And in the case of the banking, I mean, the big four banks still have their position, and that one actually seems relatively settled for the moment, or at least up to now. In the case of Tesla, I think that is still being debated. The way we come at it is maybe a slightly mischievous angle in that.
Well, you're an arms dealer. You're selling to both sides.
Well, we are selling to both sides.
I'm quite sure that's not in your pitch.
We are selling to both sides, but we have actually a slight preference, which is, as you can probably tell, as you might guess from our roots, we really like startups. And in particular, we go to significant effort to make our infrastructure really easy to use for new companies, because we think that leads to a more vibrant internet economy when the new companies starting out, again, I think the movement towards cloud services was part of this. I think Stripe is a part of this. I think there are other infrastructure platforms that will come along that'll be part of this, that basically reduce the set of advantages that incumbents have, so that if you are an incumbent company, you have to compete on the basis of product. You can't compete on the basis of the fact that you have a giant in-house payments team. That used to be an advantage 10 years ago and is much less of an advantage today now that you can just take the infrastructure off the shelf from Stripe. And so this is why, for example, one of the things that takes most effort on our part, but is actually pretty strategically important to us, is that all our products are available on a self-service basis. The Stripe platform is not something that you have to come in and get permission to use or anything like that. You go to stripe.com/API/docs. It's there. You don't even have to talk to someone from Stripe to use it. And that's actually a significant part of the business strategy, because we really believe in arming upstarts such that they can compete on a more level playing field with the big companies. And so we kind of see this battle. We participate in this battle a little bit, but we're all about trying to help the new companies come along.
So we only have a few minutes left. I want to touch on two more big topics, one very global and one very local. On the global side, you guys announced a product at Mobile World Congress. Was it this year or last year?
Last year.
Last year. That was kind of surprising. So some people think of you as payments, but this was really about helping companies set up shop where they wanted to do business. It's called Atlas. Can you give an update on how many businesses have incorporated through Stripe and where that product is going?
Yeah. So Atlas, it's funny. People were surprised when we introduced Stripe Atlas. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a way to incorporate a Delaware C corporation, get access to a US business bank account, get tax and legal advice, and get a Stripe account for payments. And so it's everything you need to start an internet business, all provided together. And when we introduced it, people were sort of surprised. They're like, why is this coming from Stripe? I don't get it. And it's just like I said in the beginning. We're about providing economic infrastructure. Payments is, of course, a significant component of that. But if there are other things that are acting as barriers to people building and scaling online businesses, well then, crap, we should go focus on those instead. We're quite mission-oriented. We're not about defining ourselves by working in a particular industry. And so we've seen all these amazing businesses from 120 countries around the world build on Stripe. Build on Atlas in particular. Mixtiles, I won't give you the exact number, but Mixtiles, for example, is a business out of Israel that's now selling a product globally. They sell a photo printing product, and they were a brand new company that started on Atlas. And so if you actually look at the Stripe kind of recent product launches, it's not very paymentsy looking. It's economic infrastructure-y looking.
So you said not an exact number. Is it hundreds? Is it thousands of companies?
It's a pretty significant, it's a significant part of our business. This is not a side project.
And is it all global companies looking to set up roots in the US, or have there been US entrepreneurs that are like, this is just easier, I'm going to do it this way?
Well, it's kind of similar to the framing I gave you for the core Stripe infrastructure being about giving all companies access to the infrastructure that the best companies have, and so leveling the playing field in that regard. Similarly, what we noticed was that you have all these talented entrepreneurs all around the world. The US has a really nice business climate, and so we want to make it really easy for someone to start a company in the US business climate. And so we see a significant number of US companies starting on Atlas because it's the easiest way for them to do so. It's often the most cost-effective way for them to do so, but also a very strong demand from international founders, given that it's easier for US founders. It might be newly possible for international founders.
Well, and I want to touch on that. You guys are immigrants to the US. We talked a lot yesterday. There was a lot of discussion around immigration. Obviously, Atlas is a nice solution if you can't actually be in the US, but I imagine you guys have benefited a great deal from being able to physically be in the US. What are your thoughts on sort of the need not just for the benefit to immigrants, but also the benefit to the tech industry of people like yourself being able to come to the US and set up a business?
Yeah, obviously we are pro-immigrant, but kind of more broadly, I identify with this so much in so many ways. I think Stripe is about mobility and access, and immigration is one instantiation of that. But so for context, I moved to the United States in 2009, and so I grew up in Ireland. That was my experience. But if you look at a lot of Stripe users, to the Mixtiles example, they're based out of Israel. They're selling a product all over the world. We have companies from 120 countries on Atlas, and so we think it should be easier for people to kind of move around. We also think it should just be easier for people to move around digitally and move around online, and so we can't directly affect US law. I wish we could. And so the second best thing that we can do in the meantime is make it such that no matter where you're based, you have access to a lot of the benefits of
Are
other
you
countries.
doing more to make sure that the people that are making laws and policies know your guys' story, know, hey, we wouldn't be here if you weren't more open. If the new laws you're talking about were here, Stripe wouldn't be here.
I think tech companies tend to be fairly unified on this topic, and we've spoken out and kind of made our opinion fairly well known. And Patrick, our CEO, and I don't tend to be particularly shy on Twitter or anything like this. And we've made our voices known there, but I think the voices of tech will sadly not be enough.
So you're not that optimistic that it's going to
Well, I just think it will need a broader coalition than just tech companies.
And so that was the global topic. Really local, you guys recently set up shop here. It's only the second place you guys have done business outside the Bay Area in terms of physical locations. Why Seattle, and what do you guys want to do here?
Yeah, I mean, we just opened our first engineering office outside of San Francisco here in Seattle, which we're pretty excited about. And I mean, it kind of gets to everything we were talking about over the course of the conversation, which is if you were building an infrastructure platform, which we are, the engineering side of that, there's, when you look at the machine learning for fraud, when you look at the kind of the developer product aspects of building a platform like that, the engineering talent is one of the main things that we think about. And here in Seattle, you have a large number of the people who built two of the most successful platform companies of all time, Amazon and Microsoft. And so I think it was a pretty natural choice for us, given the nature of the product that we're building, which is a developer-oriented product, an infrastructure product for other businesses.
So are you thinking of it as an HQ2, or this is really a satellite
I think
office?
the HQ2 name is taken, sadly.
So you
Plus,
guys,
we didn't even run a contest. I didn't know that's what you're meant to do.
You might have gotten some tax breaks. You could be the first self-made trillionaire.
Exactly. HQ3. Yeah.
So I assume you guys are hoping to hire in Seattle?
Yep, we're hiring here. We're aiming to be 100 by next year, which will be a fairly significant growth. And so we're working on it.
Great. Well, thanks, John. Appreciate it. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Again, if you want to keep getting my newsletter, be sure and sign up. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much. Thank you.